The morning sky over Tokyo burns an eerie crimson on April 7, 1945. The city, once proud imperial untouchable, now trembles beneath the drone of distant engines. Somewhere beyond the haze, another American air raid is forming. But this dawn carries a sound unlike any before it, sharper, faster, predatory. At Chofu Airfield, 20 miles west of the capital, Captain Masao Suganaga adjusts his leather gloves inside the cramped cockpit of his Kawasaki Ki-84 Hayate. His hands move automatically, trained by 3 years of relentless combat, yet his mind is uneasy. The air smells of fuel and fear. Every morning, the ground crew at Chofu listens for that metallic thunder, the arrival of B-29 superfortresses, and every morning the same ritual unfolds, a desperate scramble to defend a homeland already in flames. But today feels different. Suganaga hears the chatter in his headset, confused, urgent voices from ground control, unidentified aircraft approaching from the southeast. Silver fuselages. Not bombers. Repeat, not bombers. He freezes. Southeast. That direction makes no sense. The nearest American bases are hundreds of miles away, Saipan perhaps, or the recently captured Iwo Jima, but even that is over 600 miles distant. No fighter aircraft in the world can fly that far and still fight. Suganaga runs the numbers instinctively, fuel, range, altitude. Every Japanese pilot knows the cruel arithmetic of air warfare. More fuel means less armor. More range means fewer weapons. The Zero had taught them that lesson, a graceful killer, with the endurance of a falcon, but the protection of a paper lantern. They called it the flying coffin once the Americans learned to aim true. Now the tables have turned, or so they believed. American fighters burdened by heavy armor and massive guns could never reach the Japanese homeland. Every B-29 bombing run over Tokyo was a lonely gamble. The Japanese waited at the coasts, ambushing the unescorted bombers, when the American fighters were forced to turn back. It was one of the few advantages Japan still held. But something in the sky has changed. Suganaga's chief mechanic, Sergeant Yamamoto, slams his fist against the cockpit frame. Captain, emergency scramble. Unknown fighters approaching from the south impossible. That would mean they've come from Iwo Jima. But no aircraft. No single-engine fighter could make that journey. As his Nakajima He-45 engine coughs to life, Suganaga catches a glint of silver far to the horizon. Not the dark shapes of Hellcats or Corsairs, those familiar predators of carrier raids, but sleek, bright, and disturbingly elegant silhouettes slicing through the dawn. His pulse quickens. All units scramble, immediately crackles the radio. Unidentified fighters over central Tokyo. The captain's Hayate roars down the runway, its tires skimming the concrete before lifting into a sky already haunted by strange glimmers. As he climbs past 10,000 feet, the city unfurls beneath him, the labyrinth of Tokyo, dotted with smoldering ruins from last month's bombings. The smoke from Musashino, the Nakajima aircraft factory, still lingers in the air, a grim reminder of how much Japan has already lost. At 15,000 feet, he steadies his climb and listens. The usual confident banter of Japanese pilots is gone. Ground control's tone is brittle, almost frightened. For 3 years, Suganaga has flown against everything the Americans could send: P-38 Lightnings over the Philippines, F-6F Hellcats from the carrier raids, even the brutal F-4U Corsairs over Okinawa. But those battles happened far from home. Here over the Japanese mainland, he had always felt protected by distance, the one weapon Japan still had. And now that distance is gone. As he scans the sky, a voice from another squadron breaks through the static. This is Lightning III. Multiple single-engine fighters sighted over Musashino type. Unknown, repeat, unknown. Suganaga banks sharply eastward. Below him, a flash, silver wings diving toward Tokyo's industrial zone. Then another. Not bombers. Fighters. American by the look of them, but impossibly far from any known base. They move with the arrogance of aircraft, operating from their own airfield, rolling and diving as if fuel were infinite. He feels it then, the slow, creeping dread that comes when the familiar laws of war no longer apply. How did they get here? He whispers to himself. He cannot know, not yet, that he is witnessing the dawn of something new, a machine so advanced, so ruthlessly efficient, that it will annihilate the very idea of safety in the sky. For now, the only thing Captain Masao Suganaga knows is this: the enemy has arrived where no enemy should be. And the sky above Tokyo, the last refuge of Japanese pride, is no longer theirs. The first contact comes not as a thunderclap, but as a murmur that multiplies one voice in the radio net, then 3, then a dozen, each repeating the same unthinkable sight over different sectors of Tokyo's sky. Lightning 3, to control the transmission, hisses through static, high and tight with adrenaline. Multiple single-engine fighters diving on Musashino. Not bombers. Repeat, not bombers. Lieutenant Akira Watanabe levels off at 12,000 feet with 5 aircraft in loose formation, his Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien running smooth and hot. Below him sprawls the Musashino complex, the Nakajima aircraft factory, a city within a city, rows of machine sheds, oil tanks, skeletal gantries stitched together by rail spurs and service roads. The morning sun turns every tin roof into a shard of blinding light. Musashino has been hit before, but always by B-29s, fat bellies gleaming, lumbering straight lines that a patient hunter could calculate and intercept. This, however, is not that. Watanabe catches the first glint, 3 silver darts, spearing out of a high dive, wings, steady noses down. Sleek, long-nosed, almost beautiful, in the way a blade can be beautiful. He blinks hard. Single-engine fighters. This deep that violates everything he's learned in 3 years of war. Type unknown, he reports, voice steadier, now that his hands have work to do. Throttle trim, gun switch warm. Count 15. Correction, 20. There he stops himself before saying the word impossible. Across Haneda Tachikawa and Kisarazu, the same astonished descriptions stack up in the airwaves. Ground controllers speak too quickly, tripping over bearings and altitudes. Their radar scopes tell one story, their intuition another, and the human brain rejects contradictions the way a body rejects poison. Someone in one control hut says carrier raid, but another voice, tense and clipped, reminds him there are no carriers within 500 miles. The south is ocean emptiness, and the tiny volcanic rock the Americans wrested from the sea 5 weeks earlier, Iwo Jima. Too far for fighters. And yet, the silver shapes are moving like predators at home range. Captain Masao Suganaga banks east, pulling his Hayate into the sun to force a silhouette. The unknowns are fast in the dive, then unnervingly composed in the level rolling climbing, curving back into attack lines with the lazy confidence of aircraft at the beginning of a mission. Their wings are elliptical, their noses long, their canopies blister clear. Under each wing hangs a fat teardrop tank. Drop tanks. Suganaga's stomach knots. Those tanks should be empty if they came from Iwo Jima. They should have been jettisoned 100 miles ago. He knows the arithmetic as well as any man in the sky. Range trades away armor. Endurance eats performance. Fuel is time, and time is life. The A6M0 once bought range by selling its soul, no self-sealing tanks, barely any armor. It could fly far, yes, but it died quick when the tracers found it. American fighters had been the opposite: tree trunk, strong, brutal gunnery, but short legs. The P-47 Thunderbolt could take a beating and dish one out, yet every pilot on both sides knew its leash was short. The P-38 Lightning stretched that leash, but twin-engine, twin-boom machines needed nearer stepping stones: Saipan, Tinian, Guam, not the open ocean. So what then are these? On the ground, at Chofu, mechanics shaded their eyes and watched contrails intersect like chalk lines on a school slate. One man swore he saw a silver fighter dip its wing knife through a cloud and pounce on a Ki-44 in one smooth curve. Another, an older crew chief with cigarette ash trembling between his lips, muttered that the Americans had found a way to fold the ocean like paper. Watanabe, guides his formation toward Musashino's northern approach, planning the old playbook: draw the attackers away from the factory, bleed their energy, wait for the moment they must commit to fuel conservation, then press hard when they're forced to break west for the coast. He clicks his mic twice, an unspoken signal to his wingman, and angles down to meet the nearest trio. What happens next punctures doctrine like a bullet through silk. The silver fighters, still carrying their tanks, snap into a rising turn to meet him. No tentative fuel-saving extension. No conservative merge. They cut in with an aggressor's posture, as if they have all the time in the world. The leader flashes past polished metal, and Blue knows the sun flaring along its fuselage. Watanabe thinks absurdly of photographs in foreign magazines of British lines. American polish, the ghost of a Spitfire silhouette, but longer, harder, driven by a different heart. He shoves the throttle forward, feels the Hay 40 engine surge, and fires a testing burst. Tracers stitch the air. The silver machine rolls, drops its nose, a hair, and answers with a river of fire. 650 caliber guns speaking in a single voice. Not wild, not wasteful. Measured, lethal, confident. Control Lightning 3 engaged, Watanabe says, forcing calm through his teeth. These fighters, they're maneuvering like they're fresh off the runway. The ground station does not answer for a heartbeat. In that gap live all the assumptions of a nation at war: that home airspace is a moat, that an enemy's courage is bridled by mathematics, that the world still obeys last year's rules. When the controller returns, his tone is changed, colder, smaller. Lightning 3. Multiple reports confirm single-engine fighters across central sectors. Unknown type. Prioritize defense of Musashino and Ota. Intercept at will. Suganaga drops a wing and slides into a shallow dive, letting gravity pay him speed. Ahead, another pair of the silver fighters peel off and sweep low across Musashino's outer yards, raking parked frames and fuel drums in quick, brutal passes. Workers scatter tiny stick figures from 15,000 feet. A column of oily smoke steps into the wind. He remembers a lecture from a year earlier, an old instructor speaking of Europe, of American and British fighters that ranged far with bombers, that cleared the sky and then went hunting. He had dismissed it. Europe's wars were fought with rail lines for arteries and fields for lungs. The Pacific is water and distance. Below him, the unknown leader banks, clean, effortless, and for a second, Suganaga swears the man looks back. A flash of goggles, a jawline, a blue nose rounding into sunlight. Then the silver aircraft sheds its drop tanks, two white blurs, tumbling, and lunges upward into him. They're dropping tanks to fight, he realizes. Not because they must, because they can. Watanabe, 3 miles away, grapples with the same revelation. He had planned to force the intruders into a fuel calculation to make them pick between pursuit and survival. Instead, they have inverted the logic: jettison fuel, now take the fight, now own the sky now, and trust that they still have the legs to go home. His wingman calls a warning, another element sliding in from high right, and Watanabe yanks hard, the high end shuddering at the edge of its tolerance. He catches a flash of the enemy's wing root, the smooth fillet blending into fuselage, a design that drinks speed and returns control. How far did you come, he wonders, sweat stinging his eyes. How much fuel did you bring to have courage like this? On every frequency, snippets of the same astonishment. Those can't be carrier fighters. They're single engine, I swear it. From Iwo, that's impossible. But the sky does not care for human words. It rewards lift, drag power, and endurance, and it punishes misunderstanding. Over Ota and Tama, over the river bends and rail yards glittering like piano wire, the silver fighters keep dictating the angles. They slice through merges, climb when the Japanese expect them to extend, re-engage when sanity says they should disengage. They act like pilots who started this dance after breakfast and plan to waltz until noon. On a neighborhood street just east of Musashino, a mother drags a child toward a shelter as the sirens gape and howl. She looks up in time to see one of the strangers flash past, low, metallic, startlingly bright, chasing a green-brown shape that spits smoke and fear. The child remembers, only the sound later, a tearing cloth noise that was somehow also a hammer. Back in the cockpit of the Hayate Suginaga, finds himself speaking to the blank sky. How did you get here? It is not a tactical question anymore. It is existential, the quiet voice a soldier hears when the universe changes rules without warning. The answer is not yet a word or a name. It is a feeling that the moat of distance is drained, that the calendar has turned a page in the middle of the morning, that the old war ended when the silver fighters crossed the horizon and did not slow down. A new war has begun, one where range is a weapon, and time for the first time belongs to the enemy. For Captain Tomojiro Ogawa, veteran of the Philippines and Okinawa campaigns, there is something almost poetic about watching the enemy's machines evolve. He had fought American fighters in every shape they'd sent across the Pacific: the brutish P-47 Thunderbolt, the angular P-38 Lightning, and the lumbering Corsair. Each had its rhythm, its limitations, its predictable exhaustion. But these new arrivals, the silver predators sweeping across Tokyo, seemed to have no rhythm at all, only relentless grace. Ogawa squints into the morning glare, his Ki-84 Hayate banking toward the intruders. 25 victories to his name. He is not easily rattled. Yet today, as the unfamiliar fighters loop through the sky with impossible confidence, his instincts whisper that something in the world has shifted. "Those aren't carrier planes," his wingman shouts over the radio. They move like they've just taken off. Ogawa's jaw tightens, or like they've come to stay. Below, the Nakajima Musashino factory burns. Oil drums detonate one by one, flaring orange beneath the haze. The Mustangs, though, Ogawa doesn't yet know their name, dive again and again, strafing with the precision of surgeons, not the desperation of raiders. They bank in unison, roll into climb, and turn to strike again. No hint of restraint, no sluggishness of a fuel-starved engine. In disbelief, Ogawa studies one of the attackers through his canopy glass. The aircraft is all smooth lines and calculated purpose, its long nose tapering to a spinner that hides the deep snarl of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The wings curve in a perfect ellipse, like a predator's talons mid-swipe. It is not Japanese yet. Something in its design reminds him of the Spitfire he once glimpsed in a training film. But this is faster, hungrier. The American leader banks slightly, and for an instant, Ogawa reads the stenciled letters on its fuselage, P-51D Mustang. The word sticks in his mind like a prophecy. In the years to come, historians will call this morning a turning point not just for Japan, but for aviation itself. The P-51 Mustang was the unlikely child of two nations' genius, American engineering audacity and British mechanical brilliance. When the British Air Ministry asked North American Aviation to build a fighter using their Merlin engine, they had no idea the result would rewrite the laws of the sky. The Mustang's airframe, sleek laminar flow wings, and a deep radiator scoop allowed it to glide efficiently over vast distances. The Merlin V1650, a liquid-cooled V12 adapted for high altitude, gave it the heart of a thoroughbred. Together, they produced something the world had never seen: a single-engine fighter that could fly more than 850 miles, fight and return home. For American pilots, it meant something almost holy: escorting bombers all the way to Tokyo, defending them, then hunting freely with fuel to spare. For Japanese pilots like Ogawa and Suginaga, it meant their entire defensive doctrine was now obsolete. Ogawa watches the Mustang's movements, coordinated, synchronized, confident. Each one carries 2 drop tanks under its wings, yet maneuvers like a lightweight interceptor. "They should be heavy," he mutters into his oxygen mask. "They should be tired." Instead, they seem to dance. Somewhere above 15,000 feet, Major Robert W. Moore, of the 15th Fighter Group's 45th Squadron, leads his formation with the easy assurance of a man who trusts both his machine and the engineers who built it. His P-51D call sign, Blue Flight 1, gleams with morning condensation. Behind him, 20 other Mustangs cruise in perfect step. Moore's voice crackles through his radio. Gentleman Tokyo ahead. Eyes open, tanks armed, and remember, we've got the legs for this one. That last line isn't bravado. It's the truth. The Mustang carries 184 gallons internally and two 108-gallon tanks externally, nearly 400 gallons of fuel. Enough to fly from Iwo Jima to Tokyo, fight for an hour, and fly back. In contrast, a Japanese Hayate, or Hien, often carried barely half that amount. Moore's men had already flown 700 miles over open ocean and still had fuel to burn. When Ogawa closes in on one of Moore's Mustangs, he prepares for the familiar pattern. The enemy will take a few shots, then disengage, worried about the long flight home. But instead, the silver aircraft doesn't retreat. It turns directly into him. For 3 minutes, the two fighters duel in the thin air above Musashino. Ogawa pulls 5 Gs in a climbing turn. The Mustang follows without hesitation. He cuts throttle dives, rolls left. The Mustang mirrors him like a ghost. Sweat drips into his eyes. Every instinct screams that this American should have already broken off, conserving precious fuel. But no, the enemy fights as though fuel is endless. On the other side of the merge, Moore's thoughts are calm, methodical. His Merlin engine hums at 3,000 RPM, responding like a living creature. He can feel every vibration through his gloved hands. When Ogawa dives, Moore angles after him, his speed building past 400 mph. In the dive, the Mustang is a predator unleashed. It holds stability that no Japanese plane can match. Ogawa fires twin 12.7mm guns and two 20mm cannons, spitting orange tracers. The Mustang rolls through them untouched. Moore squeezes his own trigger, unleashing 6 50-caliber Brownings. The bullets shred the sky in a perfect arc. Ogawa feels his aircraft jolt a tremor, then a streak of smoke trailing from his wing. "Unbelievable," he whispers. He's still climbing. From his cockpit, he glimpses another formation of silver wings joining the fray, a second flight of Mustangs from the 506th Fighter Group, led by Captain John B. Hampshire. They streak into the dogfight with the precision of a symphony, their movements deliberate, practiced. Hampshire radios his wingman. "They don't understand yet, do they? We can stay and fight. We can hunt. We can reach anywhere in their empire and still make it home." Those words, overheard by Japanese interceptors, will later be repeated in stunned disbelief by ground controllers. They mark the moment when the psychological war is lost. Ogawa's aircraft spirals downward. His instruments scream. He steadies the stick, but the Hayate is bleeding oil in altitude. For a brief second, he looks up at the Mustang circling above him, the bright reflection of sunlight on its fuselage, and understands something no textbook could teach. This is not just a new aircraft. It is a new kind of warfare. A machine born from factories untouched by bombers, powered by an economy that can turn dreams into steel. The age of the samurai pilot, the ace warrior, defending his homeland with spirit alone, is ending. The industrial world now wages war, not with courage, but with reach. As Ogawa's crippled plane glides low over Tokyo's rooftops, smoke trailing from its fuselage, he whispers the truth aloud, not to his comrades, not even to the gods, but to the indifferent wind rushing past his cockpit. If they can come this far, we have already lost the war. Above him, the Mustangs level out, reforming into shining squadrons that stretch toward the horizon. They have proven the impossible, that distance, once Japan's greatest defense, no longer exists. The battle over Tokyo has become a fever dream, part thunderstorm, part execution. From the streets below, citizens watch thin white lines curve and vanish into the blue, each one ending in the faint crackle of gunfire. To them, it sounds distant, unreal, as if the war has retreated to the heavens. But for the men inside those streaking machines, it is the end of everything they once knew. At 16,000 feet, Major Robert W. Moore locks eyes with his wingman through a flash of canopy glass. He can feel the Mustang alive beneath him, not a tool, but an extension of his will. The Merlin engine hums like a predator's purr, waiting for the command to strike. Blue flight drop tanks now, He calls calmly into the radio. "We've got company." All across the sky, silver shapes shed their external tanks like birds molting feathers. White canisters tumble downward, glittering in the sun before bursting into trails of vapor. Japanese pilots watching from above are struck by a single, horrifying thought. They're not dropping because they're empty. They're dropping because they're ready to fight. Captain Masao Suganaga can hardly breathe inside his oxygen mask. His instruments vibrate under stress as his Hayate climbs sharply. Across the void, he sees one of the Mustangs break formation and bank directly toward him. The two aircraft hurtle at each other, two metallic arrows closing at over 700 miles per hour. Suganaga fires first, his 12.7mm machine guns and 20mm cannons roaring in unison. Orange tracers slice across the sky, some passing so close to Moore's canopy that they scorch the glass. But the American doesn't flinch. He squeezes his own trigger, 650 caliber Brownings, answering with a hail of steel. The two fighters cross paths in a blur of sound and light. For a heartbeat, neither knows who's won. Then both pull hard, Suganaga banking right, Moore pulling left engines, screaming wings, groaning. But Moore doesn't disengage as any long-range pilot should. He rolls reverses and dives after the Japanese fighter, a hawk stooping on wounded prey. "This is insane," Suganaga pants into the radio, pulling 5 Gs in a desperate climbing spiral. How much fuel do these aircraft carry? He doesn't know, can't know that Moore's P-51D began the mission with nearly 400 gallons of fuel, and even now, after a 700-mile flight and a dogfight, he still has 200 gallons left. Enough to fight, kill, and go home again. The math is cruel in its simplicity. The Mustang can afford aggression. The Japanese cannot. Far below, Lieutenant Akira Watanabe is locked in his own private hell. 2 Mustangs bracket him, one above, one below. Every time he breaks to evade the lower attacker, the upper one slides in to trap him. The coordination is flawless, their communication silent and precise, the mark of endless training and absolute confidence. Watanabe dives for the safety of cloud cover, his canopy trembling with the rush of air. "Control, this is Lightning 3, he gasps. "These fighters, they're not running. They're not conserving fuel. How is this possible?" No answer, just static and the echo of gunfire. Above the battle, Major Moore and Captain Hampshire exchange clipped words across radio channels, their voices oddly calm amidst chaos. "They don't understand yet," Hampshire murmurs. "We can stay and fight. We can reach anywhere in their empire and still make it home." The phrase will later echo through Japanese intelligence reports, translated again and again like a prophecy, written in fire. Watanabe's Key 61. Hien jerks violently as a burst of 50 caliber rounds tears into his right wing. Oil splashes across his canopy. He can barely see. His engine coughs, sputters, then catches fire. But even in his final moments, his mind is locked on a single question: how far have they come? He tries to extend the engagement, to wait out the Americans' fuel, just as his instructors taught him. But there is no end of fuel anymore. The rules have changed. Captain Hampshire closes in from behind his Mustang, steady as a gun sight. He fires once short, surgical. Watanabe's aircraft bursts into flame, spiraling down toward the rooftops of Kogane. They're not leaving. Watanabe's final transmission crackles through the radio. They're not running out of fuel. How did they get here? In that one voice, the entire doctrine of Japanese air defense collapses. At 8,000 feet, Captain Ogawa, still fighting his own duel with Moore, senses that the tide has turned completely. His Hayate is agile, powerful in theory, superior in climb and turn. But theory doesn't matter anymore. Every time he tries to dictate the terms of battle, Moore breaks the rules, diving, climbing, turning with reckless waste of energy, trading altitude for position for dominance. The Mustang seems untouchable. Ogawa pushes his throttle to the firewall. The engine howls. His fuel gauge trembles near empty. He knows he has minutes, maybe less. Across the sky, Moore's Mustang dives, trading altitude for sheer speed, a maneuver that should be suicide for a pilot so far from home. But the American does it anyway, because he can. The two aircraft spiral downward, in a deadly dance, contrails twisting like ribbons above the burning city. Ogawa catches a glimpse of his enemy through the blur, calm, composed eyes fixed. Not desperate, not weary, just inevitable. He tries one last evasive roll, but the Mustang's guns flash. A stream of .50 caliber bullets tears through his left wing, igniting his fuel tank. Flames engulf the cockpit. As the Hayat begins its final dive toward Tokyo, Ogawa's last thought is strangely peaceful. If they can come this far, we have already lost the war. He doesn't scream. He doesn't curse. He simply lets go as the fire consumes both man and machine. At 0714 hours, the sky grows strangely quiet. 16 minutes after first contact, the battle is over. 7 Japanese fighters are gone. 2 Mustangs have taken hits, but both will limp home to Iwo Jima, a 350-mile round trip that by every previous measure should have been impossible. As the surviving Mustangs reform above the smoke of Tokyo, Major Moore checks his gauges. Still, 2 hours of fuel remaining. He allows himself a breath, but not of relief, of realization. They've just rewritten the physics of war. Below, Japanese ground control listens in disbelief to the surviving pilot's reports. Are they withdrawing to their carriers? Control, there are no carriers within 500 miles. Then where? Where are they going? The answer drifts down from the heavens like a whisper from the future. Anywhere they want. When the guns fell silent, the sky over Tokyo remained scarred streaks of white smoke, twisting like the afterimage of a nightmare. The battle had lasted barely 15 minutes, yet it had undone 3 years of doctrine, pride, and belief. For the pilots of Japan's air defense, the world had changed not slowly, but in a single morning's breath. Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura circled at low altitude, his Ki-84 Hayat vibrating from shrapnel damage. Through the cracked canopy, he saw the ruins below, plumes rising from the Musashino factory, smoke curling through the skeletons of buildings that once built Japan's own fighters. He had survived by luck, or perhaps by the Mustang pilot's mercy. The enemy had stopped firing long before his engine began to die. They weren't interested in him anymore. They were hunting something larger, the illusion of Japan's safety itself. He turned westward, heading for Haneda Airfield, but the fuel gauge mocked him, the needle resting against zero. He realized with grim irony that his country's air superiority had ended in the same way his flight would not, with an explosion, but with an empty tank. Far above, the silver Mustangs formed up into shimmering squadrons, their contrails stretching eastward toward Iwo Jima. On Japanese radar, the dots receded, unhurried, confident. One operator in the Central Defense Headquarters whispered, "They're going home." Another replied quietly, "Yes, and they still have fuel to spare." In the days that followed, those few surviving Japanese pilots gathered in stunned silence. Debriefings became confessions. Captain Suganaga's name was read from the missing in action list. His aircraft had been found weeks later in a rice field outside Tokyo. The fuselage shattered, the fuel tanks bone dry, and a single .50 caliber bullet through the heart of the pilot. A perfect symbol of what had just transpired, a warrior running on empty, defeated not by courage, but by endurance. Flight Sergeant Nakamura recorded his thoughts that night in a small grease-stained notebook, a diary that would one day become part of Japan's post-war archives. Today, I saw the future of air warfare, and it terrifies me. The Americans came from beyond the ocean, fought as if their tanks were bottomless, and left us with no ground to stand on. We have spent years learning how to fight men who must turn back at the coast. Now they come and go as they please with fuel to hunt us like rabbits in our own sky. That sense of helplessness spread faster than any bomb. The pilots who had once flown with unshakable confidence now carried an invisible burden, the realization that distance was no longer a shield. For decades, Japan's geography had been its greatest defense. The ocean was a wall. Now it was a runway. In command rooms across Tokyo, air staff officers pored over fuel calculations and range charts trying to make sense of the impossible. They scribbled equations, looked again at their old assumptions, and quietly admitted that mathematics had betrayed them. The Americans, through some combination of industrial might and mechanical genius, had shattered the limits of flight itself. Between April 7th and the war's end in August 1945, the Mustangs would fly 51 very long-range missions against Japan's home islands. On average, each sortie spanned 1,350 miles often, with a full hour of combat over target zones. They destroyed over 340 Japanese aircraft, losing only 62 of their own. The numbers told a story colder than any bullet. But statistics could not capture the real devastation, the collapse of spirit. Veteran ace Isamu Sasaki, who survived the war with 38 victories later, wrote in his memoir After April 1945, "We stopped believing we could win. It wasn't fear of death, we'd lived with that for years. It was the certainty that no amount of courage could outrun fuel or range. We fought like men swimming against a tide that had already decided our fate." As the Mustangs continued their raids, Japanese pilots changed tactics, not because they hoped to prevail, but because they refused to vanish quietly. They flew higher faster sometimes, carrying half-fuel loads to climb quicker. Others resorted to suicide attacks, not from ancient samurai pride, but from brutal practicality. If you could not reach your enemy's base, the only way left was to meet him head-on and take him down with you. In June, Warrant Officer Kenji Fujioto, a veteran of 22 missions, rammed his damaged fighter into a B-29 Superfortress. His diary, recovered later from the wreckage, held one line: "Our fuel runs out, but theirs does not. So let my fire be my last drop of fuel." By midsummer, Japan's air defense had become a tragic echo, a handful of aging aircraft, fewer trained pilots, and no illusions left. They fought with the bravery of men already dead, because death was now less frightening than the horizon that no longer protected them. The Americans, meanwhile, refined their operations into an art. The P-51D Mustangs didn't just escort bombers anymore. They struck independently at airfields, convoys, and communication lines. Every mission was a statement: we can go anywhere. Even in the countryside, farmers began to notice. Children looked up at the contrails, stretching from the sea, whispering that the silver dragons had come again. To them, the sky itself had turned foreign, an enemy domain. By August, the truth had settled into the bones of the nation. There would be no more surprise raids, no more illusions of recovery. The men who flew from Iwo Jima had not only conquered the air, they had conquered the very idea of distance, that ancient guardian of islands and empires. And so, on that April morning's memory, when the Mustangs first carved white scars above Tokyo, the age of Japanese air superiority died quietly. Not with a grand explosion, not with a heroic last stand, but with the faint, enduring echo of engines fading eastward, over the empty sea toward home. The last defenders watched them go, the bright dots shrinking into the horizon, and understood what their commanders would only later admit aloud. We are no longer defending Japan. We are defending the past. By the summer of 1945, the air over Japan had become a domain of inevitability. Every dawn brought the same grim ritual, the wail of sirens, the shimmer of silver wings far above, and the slow acceptance that resistance had become an act of symbolism rather than strategy. The P-51 Mustang, sleek and tireless, had achieved something far greater than air superiority. It had redefined the concept of reach itself. When the first Mustangs took off from Iwo Jima in April, their mission was experimental, almost theoretical. No one had ever flown single-engine fighters over 300 miles of open ocean engaged in combat and returned safely. Even American planners had doubted the arithmetic. But by August, the impossible had become routine. From that tiny island base, The Mustangs launched mission after mission, escorting B-29 superfortresses, hunting Japanese interceptors, and striking airfields and supply routes with surgical precision. The Japanese called them long-arm devils. The Americans called it Very Long-Range Operations VLR, a phrase that would quietly usher in the jet age. In just 4 months, the 20th Air Force conducted 51 such operations, covering a total of more than 70,000 combat miles. The results were devastating. 341 Japanese aircraft destroyed, countless more damaged with minimal losses. But the numbers, cold as they are, only hint at the deeper shift, the spiritual disarmament of a nation that had once believed geography itself was invincible. Japan's airfields from Kawasaki to Chiba became little more than targets for training runs. No city, no factory, no stretch of coastline was beyond reach. What had once been a defensive advantage, the Pacific's vastness, had turned into a vast, empty vulnerability. The moat of the empire had dried up overnight. Veteran pilots like Master Sergeant Isamu Sasaki, survivors of the Zero's golden age, found themselves standing on cracked runways staring at the horizon that had once protected them. In his post-war memoir, Sasaki wrote, "We thought bravery was infinite, that the sky would bend to the will of the strong. But bravery does not refill a fuel tank. We were swordsmen facing rifles, proud, yes, but already ghosts." Across the Pacific, American engineers celebrated the Mustang as a triumph of logic and collaboration, a transatlantic child of necessity. The British Merlin engine, married to the American airframe, created a machine that defied every law pilots once took for granted. Its laminar flow wings, aerodynamic efficiency, and monstrous internal capacity turned the skies into an open road. In a sense, the P-51 was not just a weapon, it was a promise that ingenuity could erase limits once thought eternal. Historians would later draw a straight line from the P-51's missions over Tokyo, to the jet bombers of the Cold War, to the long-range drones of today. The idea that you could project power across oceans, fight and return, that no place was too far, began here in the burning skies of April 1945. For Japan, the emotional toll was immense. Pilots who had once believed in the purity of aerial combat now found themselves hunted by machines that outlasted courage. One survivor, Flight Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, later told a journalist, "It was as if the Americans had changed the map of the world overnight. What we thought was distance was only delay." By war's end, the Mustang's legend was sealed. It was the sword that reached farther than any other, the machine that carried both destruction and a new idea that mastery of endurance is mastery of destiny. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, the surviving pilots sat silently in their barracks. Some refused to remove their flight gear. Others stared at their empty hands, the hands that once gripped throttles and triggers, wondering how the world had changed so completely in the span of months. Above them, the sky was clear. The Mustangs had already returned to their island base engines, cooling in the salt air, their mission complete. In the United States, newsreels celebrated the victory. Factory workers watched footage of the silver fighters streaking across the Pacific, unaware that their work had redrawn the limits of war. At air shows decades later, old veterans would touch the Mustang's wings, polished now by history, and feel a chill of memory, that blend of pride, awe, and sorrow that belongs to every great leap in human warfare. Today, when you stand before a P-51D Mustang in a museum, it gleams under perfect lighting, a relic of triumph. But listen closely, and perhaps you'll hear the echo beneath the steel, the heartbeat of men like Captain Masao Suganaga, Lieutenant Akira Watanabe, and Captain Tomojiro Ogawa, who face the impossible, not with fear, but with the clarity of those who realize they are witnessing the end of their world. Their question still lingers in the air they once ruled. How did they get here? The answer, written in contrails and courage, changed history. Because that April morning was more than a battle. It was the dawn of the modern age of warfare, when distance died and the sky itself became a battlefield without borders. What impossible distances do you think tomorrow's machines will conquer? And when they do, will we too ask in wonder and dread? How did they get here?